Hello, good evening. I'm Josh Brumberg, president of the CUNY Graduate Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Dissertation Showcase, to our audience here in the Elabosh Recital Hall, as well as those joining us on Zoom. Tonight, we offer a window into the remarkable research conducted by Graduate Center doctoral students, and we do so through feats of brevity. 12 dissertations, just 3 minutes each, with only one slide. Years of research condensed into less time than it takes to make a decent pour-over cup of coffee. At the Graduate Center, we believe in generating new knowledge and sharing it broadly. Tonight's event puts those values into action. It brings scholarship out of the archives, the laboratories, and the fields and the seminar room, and into a conversation with all of us. Doctoral research, as many here know, is precise, painstaking, and complex. Our presenters have taken that work a step further. They have distilled years of inquiry into clear, compelling presentations for us, all of us who are non-experts. That is harder than it sounds, and it already sounds hard. I'm confident you will leave not only better informed, but inspired. I know I always do. More than that, I am heartened to see our public graduate education mission in action. Scholars producing research that deepens understanding, which in turn can make a meaningful difference in the world. The dozen students we will hear from tonight represent diverse disciplines in the humanities, social sciences, and sciences. They reflect the extraordinary breadth of inquiry across our programs and represent just a small glimpse of the more than 3,100 students currently engaged in advanced study and research at the Graduate Center. From the many applicants to participate tonight, we had a challenging task of choosing just a dozen of them. I want to thank the selection committee who read the submissions and chose tonight's participants. The research our students will describe spans topics from cat psychology to fern biodiversity to lyric poetry. Sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's not. This evening, we will once again award the Presidential Prize for Public Communication. This award goes to the presenter who is judged to be the most effective in communicating their work to the public, an essential skill in every career. We also ask you, the audience, to take an active role with the Audience Choice Award. When the time is right, I will invite you to vote for which presenter has done the best job communicating the significance of their work to you. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel of judges. First, Mr. Dwight Lee, who is Vice Chair, if you want to wave, Dwight, is Vice Chair of the Graduate Center Foundation, and a generous supporter of the Graduate Center. He is a partner of Gagnon Securities, LLC, and managing partner of Upland Associates, LLP, and he serves as the chair of the John Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. Dwight, welcome. It's always great to see you, and thanks for being here tonight. You want to share a few thoughts?
Thank you, Josh. It's an honor to be here. This is, I think, one of the highlights of the whole Graduate Center annual calendar, and I want to wish all the participants good luck.
All right. Sitting next to Dwight is our New York City Councilwoman, Virginia Maloney, who represents District 4, which we're part of. So thank you, Councilwoman Maloney. She joined the council last fall and previously worked in the tech sector and ran programs at the New York City Economic Development Corporation to support small businesses and strengthen the city's workforce. Councilman Maloney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, President Brumberg, for that, and congratulations to everyone participating today. I'm so lucky to get to represent CUNY Graduate Center, and I serve on the chair of the Economic Development Committee as well as higher education, and we're seeing both of those things on display through these dissertations, so thank you for having me.
Thanks, and good to have an alum in the House, Dr. Domenico Romero, who directs Democracy and Power program at the Mertz Gilmore Foundation, which invests in organizations working to safeguard and support vulnerable communities while promoting a thriving multiracial democracy. He received his PhD in political science from the Graduate Center and has a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering. So happy to have you back here with us, Domenico. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's just an honor to be part of this, and I love the idea of seeing how people can explain their dissertations in 3 minutes, because I keep trying, and just an hour ago, I failed. So I'm really excited about learning about all this work.
Great. And now, for the moment we've been waiting for, the students' presentations. Let me take a moment to explain how this will work. Each student will speak for 3 minutes, and if not, this is electrocuted, guys. Immediately followed by the next student. Following the last presenter, you'll cast your vote for the winner of the Audience Choice Awards. I'll explain that at the end, based on the student presentations that made the strongest impression to you. After the voting, I will ask the students to join me on stage for a question and answer period, where you in the audience will also have an opportunity to ask them questions about their research. So our first presenter is Claire Monfredo from our music program. Let's begin.
Good evening and welcome. What if I were to tell you that Yo-Yo Ma is waiting backstage, ready to play the Bach cello suites for us tonight? Now, sadly, that's not the case. But if it were, I imagine you might be excited about 2 things. First, to hear a world-class musician, and second, a beloved piece of music. You might even be excited by the combination of these 2 things, Yo-Yo Ma's personal interpretation of Bach. In classical music, performers must do 2 things to be considered great. First, they must follow the directions that usually someone else, namely the composer, wrote. And second, they must convey something personal about themselves in their performance. But there's a problem with this way of thinking that, as a cellist myself, trained for decades, I've witnessed firsthand. The emphasis we place on composers' intentions is often used to suppress rather than cultivate personal expression in performers. The result is that performers give interpretations that are much more similar to each other than even what the written music allows. During my time at the Graduate Center, I decided to abandon the question of composers' intentions and ask something different yet surprisingly obvious. What are performers actually doing when they play a piece of music? To do so, I collected 23 recordings made by living acclaimed cellists, all playing the prelude to Bach's 4th cello suite. And then I did something completely different than my training as a musician. I turned to data. Using a program called Sonic Visualizer, I annotated 3 measurable features of recordings: tempo, or timing, loudness, and timbre. And then I coded in Python to quantify and compare different performers. Now, as someone with 0 background in data science or statistics, this was super challenging for me, but I found something completely unexpected in my analyses. When I was looking for features that I assumed were most individual in performances, namely how performers phrased the music, I found that they were actually remarkably similar to each other. Meanwhile, musical features not typically studied, like bowing technique, showed far greater variety. In short, what I found was that even though players sounded very different from each other, they interpreted the music very similarly. So what does this mean for performers? I think we all know that coming to listen to Yo-Yo Ma is something unique and special. But my guess is that if the constraints of classical music tradition were lifted, he might give us a new and revolutionary way of interpreting the same piece. And so my hope is that with this research, we invite ourselves to reconsider the obligations that performers have in classical music. In doing so, we give performers greater opportunities for self-expression, and for listeners, we provide the chance to hear this music that we know and love in new, exciting ways. Thank you.
Good evening. Imagine a place where climate is perfect for ferns. Warm, wet, everything they need to thrive. Because ferns are good indicators of climate, we expect them to grow wherever conditions are perfect. Now, imagine that same place. The rains don't last and everything dries out, with far fewer ferns than you would expect. This is what we see across much of tropical Africa. So here is the question. What shapes where ferns can grow? Climate, like temperature, rainfall, elevation, or something more? To answer this, I spent months in the field collecting ferns in places like Madagascar, where many species are found nowhere else on Earth. I hiked through the mountain forest, through the rainforest, sampling ferns across different elevation, environment. Back in the lab, I extracted their DNA to understand how they are related and combined this with global climate and elevation data to compare environmental conditions across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Americas. This work is part of my PhD research here at CUNY Graduate Center in collaboration with the New York Botanical Garden. What I found is that climate matters, especially temperature and moisture. But on its own, it doesn't tell the whole story. If climate were the only factor, then Africa should be full of ferns, but it isn't. Because similar climate don't always support the same number of ferns. Even when conditions are perfect, not all species can survive. And this matters because as climate changes, suitable habitats of some species is expected to shrink. And this may also be true for some other species that are facing climate change today. So ferns don't just follow climate, they also follow their history and how far they can spread. So imagine the future that is not just shaped by climate, but by how much suitable habitat remains and by which fern species persist within it. Climate tells us where species could survive, but their history decides where they do. Thank you.
Good evening. Who do you think of when you picture a Latino food business owner? Most people think of street vendors. However, that is not the whole story. Latino food business owners are also selling salsas in Whole Foods and empanadas in trendy neighborhoods, not just working in low barrier to entry jobs. Coming from an Argentine background myself and being a lover of food, I wanted to learn more. My research asks, why are highly educated and second-generation Latinos with access to high-paid professional jobs starting food businesses? I argue that food business is no longer just a risky job of last resort, but can also be trendy, prestigious, and cool. To find out why, I interviewed 41 Latino food business owners in New York City, using pseudonyms to protect their identities. Their businesses ranged from small brick-and-mortar restaurants like the one you see in the photo, to pop-ups and supper clubs, to selling packaged goods. Starting the research in the pandemic, I was concerned that qualitative research would be impossible. But the reality was our whole lives had changed, so how I did research had to as well. I incorporated phone and video interviews into my methodology and gained a new level of connection with my interviewees, speaking with them as their children played and while they packed orders. Most importantly, my research shows that Latinos' labor market position is more complicated than presented in scholarly work in the media. First, Latino food business owners are entrepreneurs, just like other owners of trendy cultural businesses from different cultural, ethnic, and national backgrounds. For instance, take Alana, a Colombian immigrant in her mid-30s who studied law and later went to culinary school. Alana sold arepas at outdoor markets and also hosted dinners in her home where she'd educate guests about Colombian foodways. Founders like Alana are starting a business out of passion rather than necessity. Second, many of these Latino food business owners have complicated business plans similar to mainstream economic trends. For example, take Matias, an Argentine immigrant in his mid-30s who studied dentistry and ran an empanada shop. He was preparing to franchise. Founders like Matias have a broad customer base. They're not just selling to co-ethnics, other Latinos, and they use their cultural knowledge to their benefit. I find that Latino food business owners are not just street vendors looking to improve their earnings potential, but are also middle-class entrepreneurs experiencing lateral mobility. In particular, they have broad social networks, access to economic funding through these networks, are part of the cultural conversations around food, and are influencing trends. My research challenges all of us to rethink who a Latino food business owner is and how we think of the Latino community in the United States more broadly. My work demonstrates the diversity of Latino food business owners in New York City, where they're influencing consumer tastes and make up 30% of the city's population, and it is now easier to find tacos and empanadas are available at the ballpark. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Every year, millions of people around the world hear a single word that changes everything: cancer. We have made incredible progress in cancer treatments, yet we still lack therapies that are precise enough to target the disease at its root. In order to do that, we have to zoom in all the way inside our cells. Within our cells, there is a blueprint called DNA. These are our genes, which usually provides the instructions to the cells when to grow and when to pause. Now, these genes are not always accessible. They are tightly packaged by wrapping around a specialized proteins called histones. So these histones act as a gatekeeper which controls the access to the DNA when it's required. So these proteins in general, they change into different shapes depending upon their function. So the question is now that when the minor modifications which are reversible that are applied to the proteins, they usually change into different shapes depending upon their functions. And in cancer, these modifications basically are either irreversible or they are actually occurring at the wrong places, which leads to uncontrolled cell growth. So my dissertation question is inspired based on this. And the question that I asked is that are these minor modifications that occurs on the protein that simply allow the access to the DNA, or do they actually reshape the protein itself? To answer that, I used a computer-based method called molecular dynamics simulation. So think of it as you're watching a movie where you can see every atom inside the proteins move over the period of time. And we applied this method for both modified and unmodified protein systems for about 8 systems. And what I found was striking. I found that histone doesn't just stay into one shape, it changes the shape over the period of time upon modifications. But how do we know which one of these shapes actually really matter? In order to answer that, I used the simulation data to quantify by using a mathematical model with machine learning and computer programming analysis. And for the first time, we found that the histone changed into a specific shape which allowed the access to this DNA as well as binding to other proteins. So the final key takeaway from my research is that it identifies a specific shape of the histone proteins that allows the access to our genes as well as binding to other proteins that are involved in the cellular processes as well as those that are targeted for cancer treatments and other therapies. So this brings us one step closer to hope for basically a more precise treatments and a truly heal diseases like cancer. Thank you.
What do you feel when you look at a photograph of a woman with a gun? Something between awe, discomfort, and fascination. During the Algerian War of Independence, both the French army and the Algerian resistance used images of women for their own political ends. But when we look at photographs that women themselves created and safeguarded in their own collections for decades, a different history emerges. Women were assumed to be passive subjects, secondary to men. But in my research of the photographic archive, I discovered women who were image makers behind the camera, armed combatants at the front line, trained nurses who provided life-saving care, and even were creators of the first Algerian flag. The Algerian War of Independence was fought between France and Algeria from 1954 to 1962, and it ended over 100 years of French colonial rule. It was also strategically photographed by both sides. The French army used images of Algerian women to justify colonial rule, casting them as victims in need of civilizing, or as terrorists threatening the French state. The Algerian resistance did something remarkably similar, recasting those same women as nationalist symbols of Algerian resistance. And in both cases, the complexity and stories of who these women really were gets lost. And in my research, I wanted to recover those stories. One of the images that stayed with me is a small carbon print of a young Algerian woman named Zohra Slimi, seated at a sewing table, making Algerian flags by hand. It's not the kind of image that would have been found on the cover of a magazine or a newspaper, but it remains a historical artifact and appears in my dissertation because she safeguarded this image for decades in her own collection. As an art historian, I'm trained to look very closely at images. And I spent years looking at over 20 archives in 4 different countries, conducting this research. From military holdings in rural France, photo agencies in Paris and Toronto, Canada, and personal collections as well from Algeria and even New York. My research considered the visual aspects, but also the tear sheets, the captions, and the cataloging systems, all the parts of the institutional machinery that decides which images become history and which remain unseen. The images I'm most proud of in my dissertation are those that have never been published, never exhibited, and in some cases, never seen outside of a family's home. That invisibility is part of the story that I aim to tell. When we center the photographers that these women really were, and how they were subjects of these images, but also safeguarders of these images too, we see how essential their roles are in the Algerian resistance. The Algerian War ended over 60 years ago, but the lives of these women are still very present in its aftermath, and will certainly remain alive in me. And it's actually part of the reason the next stage of my career is taking on full-time work at the International Center of Photography in the Lower East Side, where in that collection, I hope to continue to discover more about women in this liberation movement. Thank you.
Good evening. When child is born, you like to believe their future is wide open. They can become anything they want, a doctor, an engineer, and CEO, but in reality, something else is happening. The children of doctors are often become doctors. Children of engineers become engineers. Even the truck driver children are most likely to become a truck driver. Or, like here, the son of an economist become economist. So is it an individual choice or something else is happening? Some may think that it is just a genetics, but my research work looks at how individual skills are shaped by their parents' occupations and their surrounding. What if what looks like an individual choice is actually one of the way the inequality passes across the generation? Most research studies the inequality and intergenerational mobility through income, wealth, education. But I asked a different question. I said, what about the transmission of occupational skill? So the first part of my research looks at occupational following, meaning the children following the same occupations as their parents, and I asked the question, who benefits from this and who doesn't benefit? And the second part of my research looked at the occupational skill. To study this, I developed economic models and used the US data, the longest running panel survey data, which follows the families across the years, and housed at University of Michigan. I used the data from US Census data from the skills data from US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And here is what I found. At the top of an income distribution, the children are more likely to be positively self-select, meaning they earn more by following their parents' occupation compared to any other occupations. But at the bottom of an income distribution, the children are negatively self-select, meaning they're stuck at the low-paying occupations of their parents, even if they could have been better off in the other occupations. The same mechanism, following parents, creates the advantage at the top and the trap in the bottom. So it's one of the way inequality is passing across the generation. But when I look at the occupational skill, I found that the children are more likely to go into the jobs which requires the same occupational skill as their father. Higher analytical and technical skills of the parents let the child enter into the STEM occupations. Higher communication skill of the parents let the child enter into the healthcare and the education sectors. And here is one more insight. If the parent changes their job, which requires more problem-solving skill while the child is growing up, the probability that the child end up in a STEM occupation increases by 2 percentage points. So the inequality is not just about the income, it's also about the skill which is passing on and the one which doesn't. Because the future is not chosen, it's quietly inherited. Thank you.
Howdy. When I was a kid, I really liked playing with Rubik's Cubes. My uncle would give me a hard time about it. He always said this thing about how he would solve it by taking the stickers off and gluing them back on. It really bothered me. I think following the rules of the Rubik's Cube was important to me. I also genuinely enjoyed the process of moving the pieces by turning the sides. So just getting the stickers in the right places seemed meaningless. As often happens to kids like that, I grew up to be a mathematician. The mathematical objects I study are called groups. In a group, anything you can do, you can undo. A Rubik's Cube is an example. If you turn a side, you can always turn it back. Adding numbers is also an example. If I add a number, I can undo that by adding its negative. Mathematicians in my field are trying to classify all of the groups, like how in biology they're trying to classify all the species. This is a huge mathematical project, not something one person could do in a dissertation. One tool we have in this project is we have a way to tell if two different looking groups are actually the same. My friends and I turned that tool into this computer program. You have a necklace of colored beads that corresponds to a group. On the left are some buttons you can press that change the necklace in certain special ways. What's special is the changed necklace, which you see on the right, has to correspond to the same group as the original necklace. So if I have an entirely new necklace and I want to know if it corresponds to one of the groups we've already classified, I can type it into my program, and then I just have to check if I can press the buttons to turn it into one of the groups in my good old Groupodex. So there's an existing computer algorithm to decide if you can do it or not. I found a way to speed it up, though. So the algorithm that exists has to read the necklace over and over and over again. I found for every group in the Groupodex a pattern you can look for in the new necklace, where if you see it anywhere in the necklace, even as just a part of the necklace, it means you can't find a match. These patterns that I found are based on work from 90 years ago by a mathematician named Henry Whitehead. I don't think he could have anticipated how I'm using his work. When he wrote about these necklaces, computers barely existed. It was decades before Erno Rubik invented my favorite toy. I don't know if I can predict how people will use my work in the future, except I know I'll use it. My friends and I are turning this Groupodex idea into a real online encyclopedia of groups. And at my advisor's suggestion, I'm turning this puzzle game into an iPhone game, so kids who like brightly colored math toys can experience PhD level math. Thanks, y'all.
Good evening. Think about the last time you were shopping in a grocery store. Try to envision the store layout, the aisles, and where you located your favorite snack. Stores carry a wide variety of product offerings, but have you ever wondered why certain products are placed where they are? For example, an entire end cap display for just Entenmann's donuts. Well, this is a question I've given a lot of thought for about the last 5 years or so. As someone with interests in both marketing and psychology, consumer behavior research is my passion. I essentially study why consumers make the choices that they do. For example, what leads a consumer to choose one product over the competition, or which factors influence how they spend their money. Think about some of the largest consumer snack brands like Twix and Kit Kats. When shopping in a store, you may notice that sometimes these brands are displayed on their own, so a display for just Twix. But other times, they're displayed together alongside each other, so Twix with Hershey's and Kit Kats. In my research, I explore how these differences in retail environments shape consumers' preferences. Specifically, I ask, does promoting one brand alongside multiple different brands impact consumers' purchase intentions? To answer this question, I looked at what thousands of shoppers actually did. I obtained a product sales data set from grocery stores that ran these different types of displays all across the United States. Across over 40,000 sales observations, I found that when brands were promoted alongside multiple different brands, sales increased. I also conducted experiments in a marketing lab where we gave people real money and showed them one of these product display images to create a simulated shopping experience. We then asked people to choose between keeping the money we gave them or to buy a Twix. We found that when participants viewed the image with multiple different brands together, they were over 30% more likely to choose to buy the Twix. We find that our effect is driven by perceptions of visual distinctiveness, meaning that when multiple different brands are put together, each one stands out or is more visually distinct to consumers. Now, working with this sales data was easily the most challenging part of my dissertation, but it was a crucial part of this project because it allowed me to tie my theory back to actual sales data. I spent hours upon hours rewriting my code, rerunning my analyses until I found the perfect one. But this taught me a powerful lesson in perseverance and reminded me not to give up on something I truly believed in. Retail environments are cluttered and competitive, and marketers are always looking for new ways to highlight their products over the competition. While my work focuses primarily on what occurred in retail stores, the findings can apply to other contexts, such as shopping online or through a retailer's mobile app. The findings from this research carry insights for marketers and retailers, and the advice to managers would be to create these displays with multiple different brands of products together. The next time you're shopping, you may notice these strategies in action. I look forward to continuing this work in the fall as a tenure-track assistant professor of marketing at Fairfield University. Thank you.
Good evening. What does poetry do in the world? That question is at the heart of my dissertation. But before beginning my PhD, the question I asked was different. I used to ask, what does this poem do to me? What about Emily Dickinson so often leaves me awestruck? Lines like, the soul has moments of escape. When bursting all the doors, she dances abroad like a bomb. Such words are hard to forget. They ask to be learned by heart. And to have words inscribed upon your heart affects your relationship to language. It affects your relationship to yourself. Studying the ancient Greek philosophy of the care of the self helped me think through this. According to this philosophy, before being able to understand our places in the world, we must first cultivate ourselves through rigorous practices. My argument, then, is that lyric poetry can be understood as one of these practices, capable of transforming the practitioner and their relation to themselves and to the world. My question thus evolved, no longer just, what does this poem do to me, but what does poetry do in the world? To explore this, I chose three poets, John Keats, Charles Baudelaire, and Rainer Maria Rilke. But I knew my dissertation would be stronger if each chapter were a dialogue between a pair of poets. So I eventually established three pairings, each approaching poetry as a practice in the care of the self in a unique way. I paired William Wordsworth with John Keats and focused on their differing approaches to the poetic self. I placed Charles Baudelaire in dialogue with Emily Dickinson and considered how their work helped inaugurate modern poetry. And finally, I brought Rainer Maria Rilke and Jory Graham together, exploring their shared philosophical preoccupations relating to modernity. With the poets thus chosen, I set to work, and I eventually came to focus on language and attention as through lines for thinking of lyric poetry as a practice in the care of the self. Because poetry demands an engagement with language capable of affecting our very way of being in the world. And our way of being in the world is fundamentally shaped by attention. And poets often explore modes of attention, attempting to convey them in the language of their poetry, as John Keats does in 3 words, "Darkling, I listen." This is his quiet suggestion that we suspend judgment, that we slow down, that we simply listen. So what did all this poetry do to me? It transformed me. It provided possibilities of what it might mean to dwell poetically on earth. Hence the question, what does poetry do in the world? For a poem, far from being an isolated act of expression, is a unique event oriented toward truth, seeking encounter with another. This is why I argue that lyric poetry is a practice in the care of the self. Thank you.
Good evening. Most of the time, it's the baddest kid who's going through the hardest shit. This was a quote that a young man I was interviewing told me when he was talking about his experiences with education leading up to the time he became incarcerated as a young person. As of today, May 11th, 2026, there are currently over 267 young men and women between the ages of 13 and 19 years old incarcerated in one of 2 secure detention facilities in New York City. In the last school year, 2024 to 2025, Passages Academy, which is an arm of the New York City Public Schools exclusively teaching these young people in carceral systems and in court involved, they served over 1,000 students. Of those 1,000 students, 60% were Black, and over half of them, total at 1,000, over half of them were diagnosed with disabilities. How did they get there? To answer this question is what brought me to CUNY in the first place. I was a New York City public school teacher teaching special education, and on the weekends, I was volunteering with young men and women who were incarcerated on Rikers Island. I wanted to see why there was so much overlap between special education and carceral systems. And I also wanted to find a way to showcase to the world the brilliance, creativity, heart, self-reflection, and ingenuity displayed by both of these groups. This brought me to Drama Club New York City. Drama Club NYC is a nonprofit organization that provides theater training to incarcerated and court-involved and formerly incarcerated youth in New York City. I interviewed young men and women from Drama Club who had been incarcerated as teens to find out about their earliest experiences with education. And what I found across the board was these young people shared stories of being segregated from their general education peers in special education, in English as a new language, in push-out schools for children with behavioral and social emotional challenges. I took this interview data to Drama Club, and the youth created a special show called How Did I Get Here?, which they performed in March 2025 for an audience of over 200 family members, community stakeholders, and even youth corrections officers. In the piece, these young people had a chance to take this knowledge outside of the academy and into the public. They were able to speak truth to power by providing powerful counter-narratives describing their systems of education, where the very people that they were supposed to foster and engender trust saw them, in their opinion, as being lazy, stupid, ignorant, disrespectful, delinquents. In a talk back after the performance, an educator in the audience asked the young people what they could do as teachers to change things for young people like them in their classroom. And the youth shared simple things about connection, being a shoulder to cry on, inviting someone in during lunchtime instead of detention, but to share food with them. And most importantly, showing these young people that they mattered. My dissertation research reaffirms the belief that change, while it can seem overwhelming, starts in our own communities. As one participant shared, I see now why so many people in special education go to jail. Because teachers don't believe in them. So they go out to find ways to believe in themselves. So what can we do? We can start here. Maybe that looks like taking a pause, taking a breath, maybe pulling out some food, and really stopping to take in what's going on with a young person when we take the time to truly ask them, how did you get here? Thank you.
Good evening. Did you know that New York State has the most lead-poisoned children in the country? Our old housing is putting our kids at risk, with over 70% of poisonings coming within the home. You've likely seen testing campaigns like this in the subway. But can we do better than testing and eliminate lead poisoning entirely? This question has been posed countless times, but my work focused on the mid to late 20th century. In this period, public health and criminology professionals saw gentrification as a solution to health and safety issues. They claimed that gentrification would provide housing free of lead toxins and eliminate a supposed culture of violence within poor neighborhoods. Inspired by these claims and my childhood experiences with lead paint, I set out to do this work here in New York City. This was no simple task, as I overcame a lot of a 2-year legal battle of our city's esteemed public health department. The other big complication was to combine 3 disciplines literatures in my work: criminology, public health, and urban sociology. To do this, I did this work in 2 parts. In the first part, I mapped gentrification across New York City and used statistics to examine how it impacts lead poisoning and youth violence. In the second, I did a case study of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, a gentrified neighborhood with the city's highest levels of lead poisoning. I observed gentrification patterns like demolitions and construction, interviewed a long-term resident of Greenpoint, and documented newspaper articles and memos from the mayor's office and the public health department. Through this work, I found that gentrification, rather than reduce or eliminate lead poisoning, covers it up. Through a legacy of industrial pollution spanning 3 centuries, Greenpoint continues to suffer as gentrification turns toxic sites into residential and commercial spaces. I also found that in Greenpoint, lacking the economic abandonment seen in prior decades, there's no longer an issue with intense street violence. In contrast to popular thinking within public health and criminology, My work shows that gentrification cannot fix or undo health and safety issues within our great city. Instead, we must prioritize clean housing for all and proactively remove toxins from our environment. And most importantly, we must plan out healthy neighborhoods. Thank you.
Please raise your hand if you are a cat person. Great. I'm in the field of applied animal behavior and cognitive science. We try and understand animals. We look at species' evolutionary history and their behavior to ask questions like, are we meeting their needs? And this is particularly relevant for animals kept as pets. Let me give you an example. You come home after a long day at work and you're greeted by your cat, and all you want to do is have dinner, relax, and cuddle with your cat. But what does your cat want? Here's the thing. Pet cats can be bored or stressed in home environments, and this can come out in ways like biting or scratching, going to the bathroom outside of the litter box, or being super active in the middle of the night. Cats did not evolve to live indoors all the time and eat from a bowl. Cats are hunters, semi-domesticated hunters, and we can improve their well-being by helping them engage their hunting instincts. And one way to do this is by playing with them with toys. This is where my research comes in. I asked the question, are people playing with cats in ways that meet their needs? I created a citizen science study where people all over the world could send me a video and show me how they play with their cat. I created a website called Cats Do Science, and 98 people from 14 different countries showed me how they play with their cat. I watched and coded the videos to see whether people were helping cats display these hunting behaviors that are so important to who they are. First, the very good news. People overwhelmingly used toys. And this is great because toys have the potential to help cats display these hunting behaviors. But when I looked more closely at the way people were moving the toys and the hunting behaviors cats were showing, I noticed something a little different. Instead of moving the toys like a prey animal might move, so a bird might fly away, a mouse or a cockroach might run into the corner and be very still, people instead were moving the toy toward or onto the cat. This is not how a bird, a mouse, or a cockroach would normally behave. In turn, many cats did not display all parts of the hunting sequence. Key behaviors that are earlier in the hunting sequence, like stalking and pouncing, were displayed less frequently. Instead, cats more often displayed close physical contact with the toy that people had essentially handed to them. In many cases, people were moving the toy like a pass or a handoff, instead of helping the cat watch, stalk, pounce, grab, kill the toy. So if you come home after a long day at work, please have dinner, relax, and cuddle with your cat. But don't forget to take the needs of your cat into account by playing with them like the carnivorous hunters that they are. Thank you.
Wow, let's have one more round for those fabulous presenters. I know that was very fun for us. Hopefully the 12 presenters had a little bit of fun and not too much stress. Now we're going to have the voting for the different awards. The judges have gone to an undisclosed location to consult. And for all of those of you in the audience, inside your program is a QR code where you can scan and vote. For those of you who are watching online, if you look in the chat, there's a hyperlink. Click on that and it will take you to the voting page. We're going to take a minute or two while we set up. You vote, and then we're going to ask the presenters to come up in a second, and we're going to do a little Q&A session. And I will invite members of the in-person audience who want to come down to ask a question. We have microphones on the front of each of the two aisles. But I'll start it off, just a question for all 12 of you. If you could just raise your hand, who at some point in their graduate career taught a CUNY undergraduate class? Right, so thank you. As our presenters well know, our students annually teach about 4,500 sections, or about 120,000 undergraduates every year. So my question to you is, how did your teaching influence your research, or did your research influence your teaching? Anyone? Well, we've got 5 people holding mics, so you guys go first. Anyone?
I have to admit that I did make my students read more poetry than they probably used to read before they had me. So I guess that's a yes, it influenced my teaching.
I'll say yes too, because again, interesting research is out there, but how to make it palatable to students is a different thing. So it kind of helped me workshop class after class how to talk.
I think for me, both. My research definitely influenced the way I interact with my students, but a lot of my research was identifying and uncovering my own biases, which I realized come out a lot of times when I was interacting with my students. So they were very helpful to me in my research.
Anyone else?
I mean, I don't know if I'd be here without my students. They were the most motivating and inspiring group of people that I have had the pleasure of meeting, and they would even ask me, how's your dissertation going? I would need hours to really answer that question, but CUNY students are extremely special, and it's a privilege to be able to teach them.
So I bet many of you have had this question when you're at home at some family event. When are you going to graduate? So what I want to know is two questions you can answer either part is, how did you know you were ready? And then why did you want to subject yourself to one more thing like tonight?
Only one thing which I wanted to graduate before my son graduated from kindergarten. That was my goal. So he's graduating from kindergarten now. Before that, I'm graduating.
For why we want to do this tonight, the irony is that I'm a high school teacher, and one of the classes I teach is public speaking. So I went into this being like, I've got this in the bag, and I was so humbled and learned so much from this experience. And taking this back to my students in my high school, I did my showcase, my workshop today, and this is how it went, and they said I was too fast, and they didn't know what I was talking about, and I needed this, and they were like, oh, Dr. Brady, wow, you've got a lot to work on. I was like, I know, guys, help me out. This process was helpful not only in communicating my academic work, but also in my day-to-day life as a teacher, and I'm very, very grateful to it.
I'm so grateful to be here because I love connecting with people about their animals, and my research led me in so many interesting directions that I think are really important for the animals that we care for. So I really did want to be here tonight to talk with people and connect with them.
For me, I knew I was ready after conducting my fieldwork in Madagascar. I was like, this is the creme de la creme, and I'm ready.
Julie, you could have gone with John and studied the marsupials in Madagascar. All right. You have a question?
I'm an undergraduate student. I love academia. I think it's amazing. And I'm curious if anyone can speak on how do you pick one thing? You know, I'm a very passionate person about a lot of different topics, and you know, PhD is huge. How do you pick one thing to focus on for like almost a decade?
I'll take that question. So I've been studying marketing for the last decade, and I think for me, it was a thing that I always kept coming back to. It was something that I looked for in my everyday life, in my environment. It's something that spoke to me. And I think if it's a topic that you just keep drawing back to in multiple different ways, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, with your friends, through social media, then that's a good indicator that it's maybe your calling.
Thank you.
Anyone else have thoughts on why they chose what they chose?
I can add something into that. So I think almost my entire life I've done science, but there are different areas into science. You can do biology, chemistry, or even in that you can do a lot of programming. But the way I picked my major, it was also something, the methods that I've never done before, and I wanted to learn something new and apply to the methods that I already learned before. So that helped me to pick mine. Thank you.
I have one small thing. Actually, I mean, I think everyone comes to what they study in a different way. And before I picked my dissertation topic, I was talking with a friend who was like, don't write on something you love because you're going to hate it by the end of it. And I was like, well, that's depressing. I'm going to spend all this time on something I don't care about. And I had exactly the opposite experience. My dissertation work totally changed the way I thought about something I've been doing since I was 6 years old. So for me, it was like a really wonderful time of exploration and being able to understand myself as well as this thing I was studying.
So I kind of cheated by choosing poetry because it's so vast. But even when it came time to narrow it down, I cheated again by choosing 6 poets. Which maybe it was a good idea, maybe it was a bad idea, but it's done, and I enjoyed it at the end. In the end, it was lovely, full of pain sometimes, but we all made it.
You wanna? Yeah, you go, ask away.
I just want to first thank you all for, I learned so much, and that was very touching, many of these talks. I wanted to ask something, actually, of all of you, if I may ask. It's a very simple response, but basically I was wondering, now that you've gone through your studies and you've graduated and worked on your thesis, looking forward, or maybe on a day-to-day basis, if you could distill, or if you had to distill your life's work and your passion and all that into a single word, I was wondering what word would that be? And yeah, so slightly challenging, but maybe interesting.
3 minutes is too long?
Helping animals.
Lead.
My son.
Oh man, what was I'm so blown away by all these answers.
One word to describe your
is
research.
Poetry cheating again? Can I just say
Oh, go, it's fine.
I'm the boring poet who just says poetry over and over again.
Sales.
Puzzles.
Like father, like son.
I thought I would be able to skip this question, but I see we're all going. Liberation.
Cancer treatment.
Possibility.
ferns.
Maybe personal freedom.
All right. Well, thank you. So we're going to wrap up and announce the awards, and then welcome everyone to join us in a reception in the Elabash lobby and the adjacent James Gallery. Before we get there, there are some people I would like to acknowledge and who made this showcase possible. I'd like to start with my deepest thanks to longstanding Graduate Center Foundation Board member Joanna Migdal for her generous financial support. She couldn't be here today, but we know she's watching online, so thank you, Joanna. For putting this terrific showcase together year after year, from choosing the presenters to helping them shape their presentations. I'd like to thank the Office of Public Programs, headed by Ms. Karen Sander. Thank you, Karen. Now, this is always the toughest time for me, is to thank the two faculty coaches. One, Professor Stephen Jarrett, and then the Professor Preeti Kanakamadela. Close this year. I just go with Preeti K because, you know, my linguistic abilities are not that good. And to the many people in the Provost's office and the Communications and Marketing office who have worked so hard to make this a successful event. And now I will announce the Audience Choice Award. Each of our presenters has accomplished something remarkable. They completed a dissertation, which is pretty amazing, through years of rigorous research. And this class, as you heard, many of them had to overcome issues around the global pandemic, which made doing research coming to the Graduate Center incredibly hard. So talk about perseverance and resilience. Tonight, we asked each of them to reflect on ask each of you to reflect on how effectively the work was encapsulated in just 3 minutes. I should say all of this work, I'm sure, has been published or will be published, and so you can find it in more detail should you be interested. You've made your choice, and I'm honored to announce the recipient of the 2025 Audience Choice Award, and the winner is Rutika Patel. Congratulations. Thank you. All right. The judges have also made their decision. And it's my pleasure to announce the winner of the 2026 Presidential Prize for Public Communication, Kelly Brady. Well, thank you. And congratulations to all our outstanding presenters, to the friends, the family members, and fellow doctoral students who are joining us here in person and online. You've all played a role in reaching this milestone. And I have a final piece of good news for our students, besides that it's almost over and you can go eat. We are pleased to share that each student participating tonight will be receiving an additional $250 honorarium thanks to a donation from an anonymous trustee of the Graduate Center Foundation who is so impressed with your work. So congratulations and thank you to our donor. So finally, thank you to all our presenters who helped us live up to our name. We do research for the public good and sharing that research with the community that supports you. Thank you to our judges, thank you to our audience, and I welcome everyone to a reception outside. Enjoy.